recall being assigned during the transition in 1988. Brian, I was assigned to cover the transition, to cover what I thought would be an assignment to cover the White House. And I was sent up to Kennebunkport to cover the incoming president. And during Thanksgiving weekend, when I was there and doing my assignment, I found out rather abruptly, quite by accident, that instead I was being sent to Capitol Hill and that somebody else was going to be covering the White House. And I'd been at the White House for 8 years. To say that it was a disappointment is fairly obvious. I called Tim and we talked about it, and he and our mutual friend Al Hunt said that I had died and gone to heaven, because for a political reporter there was no better place to be than to be covering the Senate of the United States. And of course I discovered it was exactly true. And I cannot begin to tell you, for 4 years in the Senate, every morning began with Tim and me discussing what the story ideas were. Where was the budget action? Was it in the White House? Was it on Capitol Hill? Who was doing what? What would be going on in the negotiations? Where would Jim Baker be? What would Dick Darman, who also sadly passed away way too young? All of the major players on the Hill. Tim was so plugged in, and I'd be calling him and I'd say, you know, I know this, what do you want to do? And he'd pass it to the White House correspondent and then pass information back to me. We had such a team here. We were clicking on all cylinders. And every night, nightly news was cutting edge. And at the end of a couple of months, when we had scandals, the Speaker of the House resigning, being forced out, the savings and loan, Keating 5, one story after another, he called me and he said, was I right, Mitch? He calls me Mitch. There are only two people in the world who call me Mitch. One is Tim Russert, and the other is my dad. And he just started calling me Mitch without, I think, even knowing that my dad calls me Mitch. And that's his nickname for me. Always will be. And he called me in, he said, was I right? And of course he was right. Everything that I learned outside of the White House about covering politics, I learned at his feet and learned by following in his shoes on Capitol Hill and listening closely to everything he said about learning the House and the Senate and following people back to their offices and not being stuck in a little cubicle listening to what was said on the air, but going to the hearings and grabbing people as they would take a break to go to the bathroom. And that's the way I learned to do politics, learning it all from this guy who came and took over our bureau in 1988 and changed the way politics is covered forevermore, not only on television but on the web. In every possible way that we cover politics, people are imitating the kind of research and the kind of careful study that Tim Russert does and did every day. And there's no way to describe this man who was larger than life, who had the passions for baseball and football, for the Bills, for his family. There is no one who was filled with more love and life than Tim Russert, and it is inexplicable, it is impossible to believe that he is not with us.